beginning, and Exodus is the leaving, and of course Numbers is just what it's about. If you read the book of Numbers, it's about numbers. But so there are some different views about Genesis, and there was a thing for a long time. There were some opponents to the idea that Moses wrote it. And they said that first off, one of the arguments that went along, and I'm not talking about for a couple of years or even decades, but for a couple of centuries, was that Moses couldn't have written it because they didn't write at that time, which history since about the 1930s have shown that writing goes back at least 2,400 years or more. What's interesting is that some people on the other side of that claim that writing can go all the way back to Adam. We know that Adam had language. Language is something that is unique among peoples, which we're going to find out how that all happened with the Tower of Babel. But that if Adam and Eve were created fully human, they were able to talk and communicate with one another, communicate with God. And if God created them in that way, he might have created them in the being able to read and write, because we really don't have a time, not just biblical history and world history, in which we know when writing actually started. We can find out the first times that we find clay tablets and different things like that had writing on them, but some of that refers to things even before, and so, writing goes back a long, long time. So the other part of that too is, if you think about where Moses was raised, and where was Moses raised? Anybody know? He was raised as a grandson to the Pharaoh, to the king. He was raised in a royal household. And in Exodus, it tells us that Moses was trained in all the things of government, which means that he would have been taught to read and write, and had of the best educations, which we could talk about that when we get to it, was part of the prep work that God was doing with him to prepare him to lead the people. He had military leadership, he would have had governance, he would have had all those things together, and part of that would have been to read and write. And some of the things about, and a couple other things too. There's part of Genesis that there's actually, depends on which way you're looking at it. There are two divisions within the book of Genesis. One of them is what we call kind of primeval, or before history, and then there's the patriarchs. So, and it kind of changes with Abraham, and the book changes right there. There are others that see it as what they call pre-diluvian, antediluvian, before the flood, after the flood, because the earth changed there. And so there's different things and different ways you can look at it. I don't think it really matters, unless you're into one of those that's trying to put everything in ages, and all of those things. We do know that the part before Abraham was kind of written from a Mesopotamian background. The latter half was written from more of an Egyptian background, just the way that the grammar is and the histories. And one of the things that makes the book real or realistic is that a lot of the things that it says, like in the Mesopotamian part, or that kind of resembles the writings of Mesopotamia, which Mesopotamia is today kind of like the Iraq area, Assyria, Iraq, Lebanon, all that area, what today we would call the Middle East, kind of on the other side of the Jordan River from the Mediterranean Ocean. And that's where Abraham came from. But and that's kind of where we think the Garden of Eden was, and a lot of those things. But there's a lot in those first few chapters that match with historical documents from things that they found from the Mesopotamian time periods, how they did governance. Actually, even the story with Sarah and not having to have children and given Hagar, that they have found historical documents that say that was a Mesopotamian kind of responsibility of the woman to give the husband children, even if you had to provide that through your handmaid or whatever. So there's a lot of things in here that say, yes, we know from other historical documents that that's the way things were. So if that's the way things were, then it really wasn't a made-up book. That's the what the critics claim is that that all these they call anecdotal stories. In other words, they were all these stories, whether it be Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, the Tower of Babel, all those things, that they're all written basically kind of like Aesop's fables. They're stories that were put together to make a point, have a moral lesson, and all that, but they're not really real. But it does seem like they're real because everything adds up, everything matches other customs and things, the numbers. When we get into, this one lived so many years, he begot that one, he lived so many more years, and then this one, and all that, there are numbers that connect Adam all the way to Noah and things after that. So, there are things like that connected together. Now, the Bible being the Bible, like a lot of other books, we just got done with Revelation, and we talked about the 7s and the 12s and all those things that were there. Well, guess what we have in Genesis? 7 is a biggie. Matter of fact, the first verse of Genesis 1:1 has 7 words in the original Hebrew, and then verse 2 has 14 words. Of course, we know there were 7 days of creation. And there's the Sabbath, which is based on a 7, and all those things. The other one is 10. There are 10 actual divisions to the book of Exodus, according to families and all those things. And they have this word, it's a Hebrew word called toledot, and it means generations or the story of the family of. And Genesis starts off, after we have the creation story, there you'll see it'll say the account. I think the NIV actually translates it as the account of. And there's 10 divisions to that. And so those things kind of to work together, and it's one of those things. And one of the reasons for the numbers and things like that isn't so that it's not to make it mystical or anything like that, or to confuse everybody. It's to say there's an order. It's not random. There's not a 10 and then a 14 and a 6. It's 7s, 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 10s, 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 which makes those things the same. One of the things about Genesis too is one of the main points about Genesis is that there is one God. One of the things that was unique about the Hebrew people in the very beginning was that they were one of the few cultures that were what we call monotheistic, worshiped one God. Most were polytheistic, in which they worshiped all kinds of gods. Sometimes some cultures, hundreds of gods, and all those things together. So, but this starts off with one God. We're going to find out that that one God, 3 in 1, comes into play right off the beginning, and some other things along with that. But it is one God. And the other thing about it is that God is, we find out that once you are sinful, you can no longer gaze upon that God because of the purity and everything of that God. From that time on, from that time till we get to Revelation, to the views of heaven and of the New Jerusalem, there is no view of God as an image. God is without image. It's one of the things we studied a couple of weeks ago in Sunday school. And so, God is the creator. You don't worship anything in the creation, because then that is against God. Why would you worship something that you have to carry or you have to make and all those things? Now, there's another word when it comes to that, when making, that we're going to get into. It's about as soon as we get started, and that is the word created. Now, that word that is used there is used a few times in the Bible. But every time that particular word is used, it is used only for God. As far as as the Bible is concerned, the Jews are concerned, only God creates. Man can change, manufacture, we can alter, we can never create. Only God can create. And so Genesis is the story of not just the creation of God, it begins the story of God's interaction with his creation, and that everything belongs to God and everything is God's. And if you create it and if you name it, you have dominion over that. And so that's kind of what we're going to see as we go through a lot of these things. And it's kind of like the story when talking about the creation and everything. There was a story about the two scientists that thought they could figure out. They said, we know how to make a man. We can create a human being. And so they challenged God. They said, you can make a human. We can make a human too. And God said, okay, you're on. And he said, when do you want to start? And they said, as soon as we can go get some dirt. And God said, no, wait a minute. First, you have to make your own dirt. Even in the beginning, God wanted created, and so we can't even in that story. Part of it is they weren't going to create; they were going to remake something, and so that's the whole thing. God does not, and one of the things we're going to see as we go through too is, which is different than just about any other creation story. As we start off there, is that it doesn't matter if you look at the Babylonians, the Assyrians, even as far as the Greeks and the Romans. All other cultures, as far as I know, when the God made things, the God didn't so much as create as the God made things. They made people. It took other elements that were there and formed them to make them. I think it's the Greeks that actually, it was like the third or fourth attempt. They made people out of something that didn't work. They wiped them out. They made them out of something else. That didn't work either. And they kind of to where they come up with the human flesh and bones and all of those things. So, the Genesis. The other thing I wanted to mention too is when you get into that and went into that authorship, and when people challenge about whether Moses could have done it, there are some things on there that's called, that's what they're called. It's a term that means after Moses, because in these 5 books of Moses, it talks about his death. Moses couldn't have written about his death and all those things, but there's a few little things that they do say, somebody had to add that in to complete the story and all that. Most of them believe that to be Joshua. Now, there are other references in both the Old Testament and the New Testament in which people attribute these books to Moses. And even the disciples at one point questioned Jesus. They said, why did Moses write that you can make out a certificate of divorce and give it to your wife and that she's gone? And Jesus never disputes about whether Moses wrote it or not. What he disputes is their motives, and he talks about why, but Jesus mentions 2 or 3 times about Moses writing, the laws of Moses. Jesus, when those things were said, Jesus never corrected them to say, well, I'm not so sure Moses could write. So it might have been somebody else. Jesus left it as being Moses. So for a lot of us, it's kind of one of those things that if Jesus says it was written by Moses, that is good enough for me. Now, there are these other things that are out there. There's kind of 4 different focuses as you try to look at it from a theological standpoint, and it has to do with how God is referred to. There's the one that's called a J for Jehovah or Yahweh, and there, you'll see that word in there a lot. There's the Elohim, which just means God, and then there's what they call a Deuteronomic, which has to do with the procedures and a lot of things like that, and then the priestly, which is a kind of a priest focus and written from the view of a priest. But it's another one of those that all those things are a part of it, and there's nobody, and some of what the scholars say is that well, there's all these places that they refer to God as the Yahweh or the Jehovah and all those, and there's all these ways that others refer to him just as God. And the difference in those two words, in the way that they're done, that when you see the formal name of God used or when they're referring to that, it'll be the capital R, and then the O-R-D on Lord are smaller capital letters. You can't tell any difference in the O, but the R and the D, this looks like a smaller capital letter. And if it just says God, that's the Elohim, which is where we get the L, E-L, the shortened version of that, which just means God. Well, sometimes even today, we refer to God in a lot of different ways. There's the Father, God, and the Elohim is kind of like God Almighty, and or the Lord, and all those different things. So, even in conversations among Christians and writings among Christians and of modern Jews, we still refer to God with all those kind of different titles according to what they're doing. And it's kind of like with people today. That it depends on what reference are we using to refer to somebody as to what do we say about them. Martha down there, you're talking about Martha. Well, if you're talking about what she does don't be talking about Martha. But yeah, but we can talk about Martha as the leader of the children's church, and or what she did at the school. Being at that point she's a teacher. She's also the cook. So we use different terms. All of them are Martha. It's just about different ways that we see her, and different ways that she, what the Bible would say was manifest herself to us, and those things. And it's kind of the same way. It's not really anybody different talking about God. It's more referring to what aspect of God are we talking about at the time. So with all of that, we can go ahead and actually crack open the book. We've gone from the last verse of the last chapter of the last book to the first verse of the first chapter of the first book. So it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now, in the ancient Greek, in the ancient Hebrew, when it was actually written, there is one word there that is not there. And it kind of makes a difference on how you interpret things. It says, what's the first three words?
In the beginning.
In the beginning. There's actually not three, there's only two. In the Hebrew, it's written in beginning. Now, it doesn't sound like much, in beginning or in the beginning. But, a lot of times we throw the in there to identify something as special. You can have, somebody can be a president, but if they're the president, that puts a whole different view in our minds. And so one of the reasons that they put the in there, THE in there, because for us it makes grammatical sense. But it really shouldn't be there from a theological standpoint, because there's a difference in the beginning. Well, if it's the beginning, a lot of times it takes us back to what it was the real beginning. We don't know the real beginning, but what it is in beginning to create the earth. This is where God started. So there's a little bit of a difference, and kind of as we get started, that's one of those things in which people ask, what was the beginning? When was the beginning? The beginning, we don't know. We're not going to ever know. It's that thing about where did God come from? The theological answer is we don't have a clue. How long has God existed? Same answer. He just is, and he always has been, and all of those things. When you go to the Gospel of John, the Gospel of John talks about before the beginning. It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And he goes on to talk about that there wasn't anything that was created. It wasn't created without Christ being a part of that creating. And John doesn't say there just the creation of the world. He says nothing was created Well, even at this point in time, because this is how we know it's not the beginning. Have you ever thought about what was existing before the beginning? We talked about in Revelation that Jesus says he was the Alpha and the Omega, and that Alpha meant not just the beginning. When they use that, the reason, and it's part of the reason that they still leave that in there and translate it the way that it does, because it has a special meaning. When somebody says the Alpha and the Omega, that's not saying from A to Z. It's not saying from coast to coast. It's like it means what's beyond the coast. That was what was before the coast started. That's what the Alpha and the Omega is before the beginning, after the end. Because it doesn't say from the Alpha to the Omega. It says I'm the Alpha and the Omega. I'm before the beginning, I'm after the end. And so when we get to Genesis 1, the first thing we have to talk about is basically what the Alpha is. What was there and what existed? Well, because there is nothing else ever written about anything in the spiritual realm changing until we get to Revelation. And most of those things haven't happened yet. Hopefully that's why we're still here, because if they've all started happening, we're all in big trouble. But anyway, so what was there? What other created beings are there that might have been before creation began, or before God created the earth? Angels were there. And there are, without getting into all of them right now, there are all kinds of different, there's about 4 or 5 different levels of angels. We talked about some of those even going through Revelation. There's archangels, there's servant angels, there's angels that are guardian angels, there's messenger angels, there's all kinds of different angels. And all of those things already existed. And all of those had already been given free will. Not already been given. When they were created, they were given free will. Because we're going to see when we get into chapter 2 that one of those angels with free will becomes a part of the story, and not in a good way. So then you got to kind of look at it in one or two ways. And we call that's the fallen angel, or the deceiver, the adversary, the whatever you want to call him. We usually refer to him as Satan and that sort of thing. So either God's got her creating somewhere between chapter 1, verse 1, and all those angels and all that, or sometime between there and chapter 2. And we don't have anything in all this, because one of the things that is a recurrent theme in it as God creates each thing is God created it and it was good. So, and that wasn't good. Now, the view is that Satan, the demons, and all those things were created as good, just like Adam and Eve were created as good, but with free will. And their free will is what caused their fall and their decision to do the things that they shouldn't have done, that brought about the problems. And that, I wish I could remember where it was. I probably should have looked it up. But that there's a third of the angels that are out of heaven, and are roaming around on the earth. So all those things were created before. So then you come up to the question: well, if God had heaven, whether heaven was a part of God, and the fact that however God came to exist, heaven came to exist, did God create heaven? My guess is he must have created it because he dissolves it at the end, made the new Jerusalem and all that sort of thing. So with all of that, if God had that, and it's such a perfect place, and that those that were still with him were sinless and flawless, why did he create? Why did he make the universe? Why did he make animals and put us here? all those things. Well, the best answer I can give you is that there is a difference in humans over all the other creatures. And that is that, all the angels were created as servants to serve God, to do the different things, whether they be the archangels. There's the 4 living creatures that are just around the throne and all of those different things. But the one thing that we see that runs from the first Genesis 1:1 to 22:22 in Revelation is God's relationship with people. God wanted a relationship from those that are given free will to choose to have a relationship with Him, and how God deals with those relationships all the way through the Bible. Genesis is the beginning of that. And then we see that, in a couple of special ways, with God coming down, being able to walk and talk with Adam and Eve. That Enoch went to be with God because he was no more. And then how some of those things started to deteriorate. We have the flood. And, that basically God's only got a relationship with Noah and his sons. And then the special relationship that he has with Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, the people of Israel, with David, with Elijah and all of the rest, and all the way through, to show us that God wants a relationship with us. People were created to have a relationship with God. Because God didn't make us, or doesn't make us, as we get into it, to be robots. If there's somebody that has a relationship with you because they are either they don't have a choice or they're programmed that way, is that really a relationship? Years ago, now if you're very young, which
Don't say bye.
don't know about on there, but I think Martha might be the youngest one in here, but I'm not going to talk about who's the oldest. We're going to leave that one late. But there was a movie back in the 60s or so that was the Stepford Wives, if you remember that movie. That's what it was about. All the women were robots and all of that, and so there is no relationship, and about how bad things went. I didn't see the movie, just kind of knew about it. But that's not what God wants. God doesn't want to program us to do that. God wants us to have a relationship with Him because we want to. And we as humans, we don't want a relationship with someone who's either being fake or just doing it for what they can get out of it or anything like that. We want real relationships. And part of that comes to that why God created us, because God wanted true, loving relationships. So to me, that's why the creation began. And so as we start in Genesis, in beginning, so God's already got all these other stuff that was the beginning, but now in beginning the creation of the earth, this is how He starts. And is that word God, that is the Elohim. And what's interesting is that God created. It is a plural. So the first mention of God is a word that is a singular word that is plural. Now that doesn't sound like, to us, if you said that to your English teacher, you probably wouldn't pass. But in the Greek, or in the Old Hebrew, it can be that way. And so it's that idea that, John told us in his gospel that Jesus was there. And we see that who was hovering over the water?
Spirit of God.
The Spirit. So you got the Father, the Son, and the Spirit in creating. So you got the 3 in 1, you got the plural that is singular, right? But and the word created, like I said, that word is only used for God in the Bible. And it's going to be the same thing when we get the word good. But it is singular. So you got a plural noun and a singular verb that goes along with them. That's something else that our grammar teachers tell us that we can't do. Your verb and your nouns have to match. That's what decides if they're plural or not. Well, that's the way this is. So right here in the very beginning, it gives us an indication, at least here, of the two, the Father and the Spirit. John throws the That's not the right way to put it. John lets us know that Jesus was there as well, and Jesus says that that he was there for the creating and all of those. Now, so this whole story isn't about the beginning of God. It's not even really about so much the beginning as it's about how did things begin. Where did trees come from? It's those 5-year-old kid questions. Where did that come from? Why, how, and all of those things. And it's about why are days 24 hours long? Why is the moon where it is and the stars where they are? Why don't they ever move? They rotate, but they're the same place every day. Why are there fish? Why are fish different than birds? And all of those things. And so this is the story of that. And now, the Jews have one of the best answers about all this. And when people say, well, how did God do it? He did it. And where did God come from? He is. How do you know? Because I know. To the Jews, and when this was written, and with Moses and all the rest of the people from that time on to Jews today, it is. Do you want science, or do you have faith? But we're going to see as we go along, there's more science to the creation story than you may think. And if you really want to get into the science of the creation story, do what Mary Louise was saying and go down to the Creation Museum. So you could spend days down there going through some of the lectures and things that they have. And of course, they're just like every other place you go to. You end up in the gift store on the way out. And they got all kinds of CDs and books to sell you. And they got the trinkets for the kids. But it is a cool place. You ever have a chance to go there, you should go. So, in beginning, the creation of the world, not in the beginning, but when God began to create, is another way to put it. The heavens and the earth. Now, we just said that God was in heaven. So how does he create the heavens and the earth?
Is it the heavens we think of as the clouds and all of that, or is it? That's what I was assuming.
Yeah, it's plural too. Did you notice that? Heavens and the earth. Earth is singular, it's plural. Jews, and even Paul speaks of that, and later on when he talks about being caught up into I know a man who was caught up into the what heaven? Does anybody remember? The third heaven. And why was it the third heaven? Because what we see as atmosphere, what we would call the atmosphere we live in, that's the first heaven. The second heaven is what we call outer space. The third heaven is the residence of God right now. So that's the way they say it. So God was creating two of the three heavens, the atmosphere and space. So God is creating heavens and earth. There's only one earth. It doesn't say planets. It says earth, one earth. And it's one of those things when you think about that we there's always that search for a new earth out there, right? Proof of life on another planet, we call it. It's going on all the time. And one of the things too, and to kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but what's the one thing that they always look for? To water. Got to have water for life, and all that. But anyway, so and that's one of the first things God deals with here. But it tells us there's one earth.
He decided to create all of this stuff.
Well, to create everything else, in my viewpoint, is that he created, because the way that it goes, which we're going to get there when we get to that part of it, but God created everything, everything's in this world and everything around it for people, because he makes everything else, then he makes people and puts them in the middle of it and says, basically, there it is, I've given it to you for food, and all plants and all those things, and at that time they had relationships with the animals and all that, and he says it is yours to live in and to take care of. So if you're going to create people, you got to have some place for them to live, and that's what he created for all of us here, thinking with the end point being that we would be here. God didn't start in the beginning say, well, what am I going to make first? Or where's this thing going to end? And, it's kind of like if you build a house, you don't build a kitchen, put the kitchen cabinets up, put them all together and mount them and say, that's where the kitchen's going to be. That's kind of the last thing that you do. And the first thing is you got to have a plan. You start with the dirt and you work your way up from there. And that's what the creation story is where God started to get at the point he was ready for us to move in. And so how it goes. So we have the heavens and the earth. So that's what he's getting ready to, he's already knows what he's going to do. Now we don't get to those for a while. And that's not where he starts, but that's the plan, to have the heavens and the earth. And so now the earth was what?
Formless and empty.
Formless and empty. And darkness, so it was formless, empty, and dark. And that darkness means there was no light. I don't know if you've ever been on a cave tour, but we've been on a couple. We were at Mammoth Cave, and I've been at Mark Twain's cave, supposedly where he hung out as a kid and wrote about Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn and all that. But one of the things they do when they get you in there is they shut off the lights, and you have never seen darkness till you've seen darkness in there. And it was kind of a tourist trap. The Grand Canyon Cave, Brian and I were in once, and it wasn't anywhere near the Grand Canyon. But anyway, that's one of those things. It is the weirdest when you can do that and can't see your hand. We talk about it being dark around here, but even on cloudy nights, it's not all that. Although up in the mountains, when I was up there a couple of weeks ago, it was so dark one night I couldn't see the windows. It was a cloudy, been raining like this, and you don't usually have that kind of darkness around. But in a cave, that's the kind of darkness. That's the word that's being used here. It was that kind of dark, and so basically, nothing. It's void. It's empty. So there is nothing there, just the dark deep, and that's kind of for a lot of people that's kind of scary. And actually, we're going to see with Abraham and a couple others when they went into that kind of a dark, deep sleep, so that it terrified them, and you would be terrified in something like that, and to know that there was nothing. And the point of it is, when God started, what was there? Nothing. That's the point. There was no earth to form anything out of. There was no ground. There was nothing living that he changed. It was formless and void and deep and dark, and except for what? The Spirit of God hovering over the waters. So there, all this thing now, that too would have scared a lot of Jewish people. Jews, ancient Jews, I'll put it that way. Ancient Jews were fairly afraid of the water. It's in some of the Psalms. It's in a lot of places that, for them, chaos. The oceans were chaos. And one of the things you may notice is that, or if you've ever noticed, Israel has a sea border all down the Mediterranean Ocean. They never had a navy. They had a joint navy once, went to take off, and their boat sank, and That was the end of it. No more navies again. They never. And usually any country that bordered the ocean had a shoreline usually had a navy. Not them. The ocean was not good. That represented darkness, chaos, and the deep, no bottom, all that kind of thing. So there is nothing but the Spirit of God and nothing. And the Spirit of God is hovering, which means that that the Spirit of God was something that was there, alive, and active. So, this wasn't something that the Spirit wasn't just created, the Spirit was there. So, and God said, what? Let there be light. And there was light. God saw the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the day light, or the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, there was morning, the first day. So, and that's the thing you're going to see in verse 3, 6, 9, 14, 20, 24. And God said, well, one thing too about there's a little difference to the first 3 days is God forming. The second 3 days are God filling. So first God makes, and then he fills. And part of that has to do with what God makes, and then the fullness of God and all that. So how did God make light? Said it. Let there be light. And what happened? And there was light. And it was good. Now that term good is a term that is also, it's kind of like creative. There are different terms for good in the Bible. This one is good, pure, perfect, good. God created it as perfect, holy, and all that. And that term for good is something that went throughout their history. And even if you remember that the rich young man came to Jesus and said, "Good teacher." And what did Jesus say?
He wasn't good.
Huh?
Not good.
Why do you call only God is good? Because that was the term that he used, the same term back here. And so what this guy was doing was trying to flatter up Jesus and all that. And Jesus, of course, saw right through it and said, why do you call me good? And he wasn't saying, I am not good. I'm not God. He's saying, so why are you using that term? Tell me why you're using that term. You're just blowing smoke at me. And that Jesus saying, when somebody's trying to come up, tell you how great you are, wonderful you are, and all that kind of stuff to get something out of it, Jesus said, no, that isn't working. You're gonna have to try that on somebody else. But that's that same word. Even at that point, at the time of the Gospels, that word was used only for God, only what God creates. God, and it's that same term when we talk about God is good. That word goes back to this: that God is perfect, holy, that everything that comes from God, that there is no negative that comes out of God. God is good. There is nothing, as kids would say, there's nothing gooder than God. So. And so that's what we have here. And so God sees there's light, and then what's he do? Separates it. Separates light from darkness. Now, it's one of the things about that. Do you know that light and darkness cannot mix? Have you ever thought about that? And one of them is more powerful than the other by far. There's not even a comparison. Which one is the more powerful? Light. Light can shine in the darkness. Can darkness overcome light? We was talking about that cave or those caves. And that can be pitch black. But one of the things that they told us at Mammoth Cave, there was one of those little kids with the shoes that, they walk and the light comes on their heels. They said, pick them up and to either keep their feet still or take their shoes off, because just even that little bit. and they flipped on, I don't remember if it was that one or Mark Twain, that when everything was pitched back like that, they just flipped on a little bitty light, and it was like, woof, and all of that. And so, with all the darkness that was in that cave, and just that one little bitty light, that darkness couldn't overcome that light. God separated so that they don't mingle. Excuse me, they don't mingle, and the light which came from God overcomes that darkness. God created the light. And, it's that way. It doesn't matter what light there is. Light always shines into the darkness. Darkness never shines into the light. And part of that is because God separated the two of them. So, you can take something that's red and something that's blue, and you pour them together, and they mingle, and you get a different color. And you take yellow and blue, you get green. Red and blue, you get purple. All those kind of things, and they mingle. And one is not more powerful than the other. If you pour more of one, but you take that one little light, and it overcomes the darkness. And that whole idea of that light goes all the way through. And even at the end in Revelation, what do we have? There was no darkness because
Always light.
Because it was always light. The light that shined out from the throne, so there was no need for sun or moon or stars or anything like that. And so the light, when God created it, the light was perfect. He separated the light. And what did he do after he separated them? Day and night. Now, why would he do that?
I don't know, but have we screwed that up too?
No, I don't think we messed that one up too. That's exactly, yeah. He created it. They're his. He has the right to name them. When you name something, and that's going to be something we're going to see through the book of Genesis all the way to the end of it. When you see that somebody names something, that means they have control over that. God told Abram, your name is no longer Abram, it is Abraham, because I said so. And so what was his name after that? Abraham. You had Jacob, and he said, your name's no longer Jacob, it is Israel, struggles with God, because I said so. And that's not just a biblical thing. When you get back towards the end of the New Testament, when the Babylonians are about to take over, and there was the Egyptians and a lot of things like that, when they got control of something, they changed the name. They changed Joseph's name. They changed Daniel, and what the other two names were. Didn't you end up with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Because the king had control of them now, he changed their name. Whatever, if you were in charge, you had the right to name it. God is in charge, so he has the right to name it day and night. And so if he calls it day and night, what's it up to us? Nope. There are some things that are as clear as night and day. And this is one of those that, God made it. He has the right to name it. Now he can delegate that right, as we'll see later on. But right now, he has the right to name it. And so, what happens next? Once you got day and you got night, and the light is separated from the darkness, what do you have?
Evening and morning.
Evening and morning. You transition, so you got day and night, and they're separated. But you have a transition from one to the other, right? What are the transitions?
Dusk and dawn.
Dusk and dawn, morning, evening. Just like it says there. There was morning, there was evening, the first day. Now, or actually, I just said that wrong. There was evening and there was morning, the first day. We count time wrong. The Jews still count it right, and some Muslims count it right, What the Bible says is that the day starts at evening. There was evening, there was morning, the first day. So, even today, when we were when we were in Israel, one of the things that was interesting, they told us, man, when it comes to Sabbath, you just plan on sitting in your room all day. There's not, there's nothing happens on the Sabbath. And that place closed down. But because the evening starts at dusk, when does the Sabbath start? Because if you can't do any work, you got to know when Sabbath starts. Now, they have some things, if you're not around someplace, it can tell you when you can't tell blue from black. If you see two stars, there's some little different things along that line. But over there in the newspaper, because the sun moves from east to west, it'll have in the newspaper on Fridays, this is the time Sabbath starts. Jericho, which is on the east side, it starts at this time. Jerusalem's a few minutes later. You get over to what they call Akko or Haifa, which is old Mount Carmel. And that's the last one, as it's kind of passing on out into the ocean. And that's when it stops, because the day begins, Sabbath begins at evening. So when it is evening, and that's what they have people that determine when that evening begins. And what time is it? Except my watch is
6:53.
6:53. All right. Moving right along. So the other thing too that I wanted to mention is so we got light, we got dark, we got morning, we got evening, we got day, we've got night. But what don't we have? So what do we have today that gives us day? Sun. We don't have the sun yet. So, this is one of those things that people come along and they say, well, all right, looks to me like God got things out of order because he's got days coming up and he doesn't have a sun. But what determines when day starts?
The night.
When the light comes. So if God's already created the light, it's one of to me, this is me. God has this light and it's out there. And then later, he actually takes it basically and goes, shoo. Now it's the sun. Because we have these days and nights. God had the light. The light was there. He has this separation of the two. And then when we get into that part, God says, I put it in a sun for a reason. To help you tell time and seasons and calendars and all those things. That's why I did that here. But it doesn't mean that he didn't still have days and nights in the beginning, because it is the separation between light and dark. And so when the light comes up in the morning, when you really get right down to it, it doesn't matter whether it comes from the sun or something else. It's when the light comes, we have morning, and God has separated them out in whatever manner it is, and in a way that is regular, because this is the first time he says there was evening, there was morning, first day. There's evening, morning, third day. And it gets into the fourth day before God actually says, let there be a sun and a moon and the stars and all those things. But he says why and how and why it's at that time, and it is part of the order in which things come up. And so, now are we going to be held accountable because we count time differently? No, because we don't even count time the way we think we count time, right? When does our day start? Stroke of midnight. But when do we all talk about when's Monday going to start? In the morning. It can be 3:00 in the morning on Monday. Well, what is that? That's Sunday night, especially if you get me up at 3:00 in the morning. You're getting me up in the middle of the night. What's the matter with you? So, that's one of those things really, some people get wrapped up about it. I don't think it really matters. Just understanding what happened here and how that goes and all of that. So, I think we'll stop there because to get into whatever we would say and get started on, we'd have to turn around and redo it again next week. So we will start with verse 6 next week. So hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll catch you on the next one next Sunday at 6. Same time, same